This is the Free Heel Life Podcast, episode number 141. I'm your host, Josh Matson, coming at you from the Free Heel Life shop in Salt Lake City, Utah. Happy Monday, my friends, my family, my protectors of the turn. I hope you've been holding it down wherever you're at in the world, and glad to be back for another pirate radio episode of the Free Heel Life Podcast, making sure to keep those colder thoughts alive as we are scorching here in the summer. Excuse me. Just got all choked up about that, thinking about snow. Newsroom and notes, hopping into it. If you're thinking about getting ready for winter, August is always kind of that weird month, right? Like it's kind of in between. September, it starts sort of cresting over. People start thinking about it. And we know that August is kind of this funky month between everything. But we are here at the Free Heel Life shop. Hit us up at customer service at freeheellife.com. If you have any questions about gear, what you need to do to get ready, maybe you need some parts, whatnot, we'd love to help you out. Tons of new merchandise at freeheellife.com. We're shipping every day. We've got some rad new designs. Loving them. I'm wearing them myself. Got some new tees on. If you follow me on the old Instagram or the Facebook or whatever, you might have seen me in them. I know Taylor's been out doing some biking in Jackson Hole. We got some friends shredding the brown pow, if you will, around the world and some of the new gear. So be sure to check it out, freeheellife.com, and pick up the latest from us. We'd love to see you wearing it out there, and make sure to tag us or send us a photo if you're rocking it and you already picked one up. We'd love to share it again. So my guest today has been a ski patroller for 28 consecutive seasons at Deer Valley in Utah. Many of those years on Telemark gear. He's also had a full-time bike. He's also a full-time bike patroller at Deer Valley during the summer. He's originally from New York State, where he grew up skiing and enjoying the outdoors. After college, he picked up his first ski patrol job at Mount Snow in Vermont for a few seasons before heading west. And that's when he scored his gig at Deer Valley almost 3 decades ago. In the early 2000s, he became friends with Noah and Jonah Howell, who were both working at Deer Valley as well. The brothers, along with some of their friends, started filming their backcountry outings and deep powder turns. These clips first appeared in a Toughguy Productions movie under the name Powderwhore. And then in 2005, they dropped their own movie called PW05. My guest was one of the original cast members of the first Powderwhore movie and went on to appear in several others. Aside from being a longtime ski patroller, he also is a proficient backcountry skier and has a wealth of knowledge in the same arena. So please welcome to the show, Darrell Finlayson. All right, Daryl, welcome to the Free Heel Life Podcast, bro. How's it going?
It's going pretty good. I'm glad to be here.
I'm glad you're here, man. This is awesome. This is, we've known each other for a long time, and it's always good to catch up. I don't see you super often, but you're probably up in the Park City zone still doing the summer thing, I'd think, right?
Yeah, that's correct. I work at Deer Valley year-round. And my winter job, of course, is ski patrolling, and my summer job is on the mountain bike patrol. So we're right in the peak summer season here in Park City. I'm riding my bike every day I can.
How is it being able? First off, I think that's probably more of an accomplishment than people realize, is having a full-time job at a ski resort and you're on the patrol, both ski and bike. I mean, how long have you done both? Because I knew you were a patroller for a long time. I want to get into that, but when did the bike thing kind of come in?
Well, it actually happened the first summer in town. So I moved to town in 1994, the fall of 1994. 95 winter, I got on the patrol at Deer Valley. And then following summer, I got on the mountain patrol. Of course, then it was a really small operation. We maybe had 10 miles of belt trail within the Deer Valley Bike Park at that time. There was only like 6 or 7 of us on the bike crew. So I got into that right that first summer. So that's 28 seasons year round now at Deer Valley.
28?
Yep.
Wow. Are you the oldest on patrol? I mean, I guess longest standing member on patrol now?
In terms of full-time patrollers, yeah, I think I am. I know the mountain operations manager, Steve Graff, was a patrol supervisor when I started, and he started the year before me. And he was the patrol director, and then he moved on. So I think right now I may be the oldest time operator on Deer Valley Ski Patrol.
That's legit, dude. 28 years. That's amazing. Yeah, I hope there's some young kid listening out there that's like, okay, that's doable. It
is doable. It's, it's a certain kind of lifestyle. You have to be comfortable with a certain salary range, but it's very rewarding in other areas.
Yeah, and because am I thinking right? Are you from New York originally? Or
yes, I grew up in upstate New York, about an hour north of Albany in the Falls region.
Is that where is that? Gore Mountain? No.
Yeah, Gore Mountain. Gore Mountain is north of where I grew up. So I skied there a little bit. Whiteface is even farther north, up in Lake Placid. Skied there a little bit. Most of the skiing I did as a child was actually near Bennington, Vermont, where my grandparents lived, in a very, very small area, Prospect ski area, just outside of Bennington. Like super small, real mom and pop outfit. They had 2 T-bars and a rope tow.
There you go. So you grew up, did you grow up in a ski family then, I'm assuming, if you were skiing when you were at the grandparents' house?
Yeah, it was. I mean, my parents were teachers, so, middle income. My grandfather really was the anchor in terms of skiing. He skied his whole life, and he was a ski patroller at this little ski area, and he was actually the inspiration for me to get into ski patrolling when I got out of college.
That's interesting. I'm trying to think, was he a skier his whole life?
Yeah. Yep. He told me stories about department store skis, that he had as a little kid, just hiking around the hills of Bennington, finding old roads or fields to ski in with his friends. And, it was like little leather strap bindings, just a toe strap. And they modified that with strips cut from bicycle inner tubes to create a heel strap to keep their boots like forced into the toe strap.
No way.
So I'm sure that, was basically a Nordic binding, not like a heel type anchored binding. And they were just bashing around the woods, having fun in the snow in Vermont.
Yeah, because I'm taking a stab here, but I think he was probably leather boot alpine days, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, of course, way back, you would just use whatever snow boot you had, whatever rubber galoshes with extra socks, and then, he kept skiing through college, and went away, was in the Navy as an aviator during World War II, came back to Bennington, worked as a surveyor, and just kept skiing and, worked at this little resort just outside of Bennington as a ski patroller all the years that I knew him. And he's the one really who taught me to ski.
That's amazing. I love that. I'm always such a big fan of like East Coast small mom and pop resorts. I mean, that's just like that zone. And in New York, New York as a state as a whole, I think has the most... maybe you know this. I thought at one point someone said it used to have the most resorts of any state. Because
that could be. I don't know for sure. That could very well be. I mean, there used to be many, many very small resorts where somebody would put up a T-bar or a rope tow, like with an old car engine or something, and that kind of went by the wayside, I think, as the years went on. But yeah, that could very well be possible, but I don't know for sure.
Yeah. Well, so you grow up out there. What brought you west then? Did you do college, or was it more just like, hey, I'm going to go out and ski, and then here you are, 30 years later?
I went to college in New Hampshire, southern New Hampshire, and skied in some places in southern New Hampshire, like Crotchet Mountain, and kind of a smaller mom and pop resort. And then started making trips to northern New Hampshire to go skiing and ice climbing and winter camping and stuff. So college, and then after college, didn't really know what I wanted to do. I had a liberal arts degree in sociology, and my grandfather literally saw an ad in like Ski Patrol magazine for Mount Snow. They were looking for ski patrollers, and he said, "You should go apply. You have your EMT certification. You'd be a shoo-in for the job." And at first, I wasn't really thinking along those lines, but I'm like, all right, why not? And yeah, I got a job at Mount Snow. I think that was 1990-91 winter season. And then went back the second year. Then I had another job as a youth counselor for a few years. And then I just decided I wanted to go back to ski patrolling. And also had never been out west, so I just decided to drive my car out west and see if I could get a job somewhere in the Rockies or in Utah or something to be a ski patroller.
Yeah, wow. So was Utah first on the list, or did you stop in Colorado on the way out to Utah?
Oh yeah, I stopped in Colorado. So this is, dating myself well before the internet, right? So, I just was kind of like did research in the libraries or in magazines and looked for addresses of ski resorts and wrote letters, put a stamp on the envelope, put it in the mailbox, like at the beginning of the summer. And I was just saying, hey, I'm interested in trying to get a job at your resort. What do I need to do to apply? And got like applications in the mail. And then I set up some interviews in Colorado, a few different places in Colorado, and then came to Utah and interviewed a few places around here and ended up landing at Deer Valley.
That's awesome. So Deer Valley was the first spot out west that you patrolled at?
Correct. It's actually the only spot I've patrolled at. I interviewed at Park West, in Solitude, in Deer Valley, in Park City Mountain Resort. I think I may have interviewed at Brighton also. I wasn't able to get an interview at Alta or Snowbird. They had, I think, a little different process of selecting candidates at that time. And I selected Deer Valley because Deer Valley wasn't even on my radar, but I'm just trying to get my applications in as many places as possible. And they actually offered at the time the highest starting pay, which was attracted to a guy living out of his car with like literally maybe a couple $100 left in his bank account. And it ended up being a good place to work at. People don't think about Deer Valley in terms of like super rad, gnarly terrain. But in terms of my experience as an employee, it's been a good company to work for.
For sure. Yeah. Well, and to Deer Valley's credit, I think the first time I probably skied there was around that time that you started, mid-90s. And I remember going skiing there. And of course, like I'm a kid in Salt Lake, so everyone's like, oh, Deer Valley, and again, it's sort of pre-internet, and it's like no one's, I don't know. I mean, I felt like looking back, I don't think the shit talk was as much there as I remember. I just remember thinking it was like a posh resort, like. Well,
right. And that's how they advertise themselves. They really were marketing towards destination skiers, trying to provide a really good customer service experience, and of course we advertise, our excellent grooming on all the different slopes that we groom on and stuff. So.
Yeah.
So some of that image is the image that Deer Valley is projecting. That's what they want to project.
Oh, 100%. Well, and that's actually kind of how I ended up getting to ski there one time, is I had a family member that worked at Stein Eriksen Lodge. Nice. And, hey, we've got this pass. And I'm like, sure, I'll go. And I remember, actually it was right after I was telemarking at the time, actually, now that I'm thinking of it. So it was probably like 95-ish, 94. And I remember on a powder day going out to Ontario Bowl. Is that right?
Sure. Yeah.
And it was money, like, because no one was skiing out there. It was like the tree skiing was awesome. Everything was really good. And I remember being like, this is weird. This isn't what I was expecting. Cause it was snowing that day. But since then I will say, like, anyone who actually has skied groomers a lot of different places now in hindsight, after skiing many places, I can actually attest that the grooming is actually, I didn't know what made good grooming, but that is legit a place where the grooming is like perfect.
Yeah.
You know,
it's an art, and they support the operators there, the grooming staff. There's a lot of high rate of return. A lot of those guys have worked years and years, and they have good equipment too. They maintain their equipment, and so it all adds up to really nice grooming. And grooming is one part of the sport at a resort. It's super fun on a nice spring day just to kind of carve big trenches down a perfectly fall line slope.
Yeah, no, it really is like top notch experience that way, and the food, and the sommelier that is bringing the nice bottle of wine around if you want to go that route. If you're not sneaking in the trees with a beer or something,
Right.
So.
Well, there's plenty of people that do that. I mean, there's a lot of locals that have known about Deer Valley, and they have like a locals discount pass, product. So.
Yeah, no, they've always treated the locals pretty good up there.
Maybe plug in Deer Valley. The other thing Deer Valley has, as you were mentioning before, is really good tree skiing, and we have really good moguls. If you like good fall line moguls, Deer Valley is a good place to go.
That's actually a really good point, because Deer Valley and Alta are the only two left. No, Mad River still. So there's three left that don't allow snowboarding,
Correct.
And I will, and you know what? Now that you're saying that, I would say that Alta's moguls are not like Deer Valley's moguls, because I think it's maybe the style of skier, like the younger, more aggressive skier, I don't think makes moguls the same way, as funny as that sounds. But but yeah, no, I'll vouch for that too. I mean, Deer Valley, I'm trying to think sort of on some of my favorite mogul runs at Deer Valley are sort of on that west side. I can't remember where all the new quads are now. There's a couple runs that are kind of north facing that run down that way. I know that's a terrible description. I don't know the names. But
yeah, well, so like the Red Cloud lift is on Flagstaff. That's actually a fixed grip lift still, and that kind of goes part way up Flagstaff, and there's only a couple runs that get groomed off of that. The rest is fall line moguls. It's a good place to go if you want to avoid lines. The lift is a little slower, and it's mostly mogul skiing. Empire Bowl is east facing, but that is just a big wide open bowl, and that turns into a good mogul field. Really fun in the spring, when we have like soft corn snow.
Yeah, no, and I feel like moguls are, it's probably time in the history of skiing where moguls come back around to be cool. It's probably about that time.
Maybe, yeah.
People are going to get bored and they'll be like, yeah, what about those moguls?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, at Deer Valley, you see all manner of skier shredding the moguls, like beginners, intermediate, and expert skiers. People love skiing them.
I think that's also the funniest part about a place like, if I literally remember hearing somebody tell me about a story where someone asked a customer, where they put the moguls during the summer. Right, yeah. You've heard this.
I've heard, yeah, that's...
is that folklore? I don't know.
It may be folklore, but definitely, guests ask very weird, funny questions at times, yes.
Have you got any funny ones that you can think of?
Oh, off the top of my head, let's see. I don't know. I can't think of anything really weird off the top of my head.
I was thinking the other one that comes to mind is somebody asking, at what elevation do deer become elk?
Oh, yes. Elk.
That's funny. It's, if nothing else, if definitely go ski Deer Valley if you're hearing all this out there. It is worth the make a good experience out of it. Like, take advantage of the food. The food's excellent. Like, I didn't know I was going to be plugging Deer Valley, but I feel like this is. I mean, it's expensive, but like it's worth the experience on a good day, and even Groomer Day is a good day there. A Powder Day is a good day there. I think it's worth it. All right, thanks, Deer Valley. So you get out there like 94ish, you said.
Yep.
But you're an alpine skier, right? Like you hadn't even crossed Telemark yet.
So here's the thing, right? So I ski patrolled a couple seasons at Mount Snow. And I went to northern New Hampshire to work as a youth counselor at this like wilderness camp. And while I was there, I decided to get some Telemark gear. And that was like the year before I moved out to Utah. So I had a season under my belt trying to figure things out. And actually I did do like a weekend long clinic with Dickie Hall and the NATO organization, North American Telemark Organization. So I did like a 2-day clinic at Wildcat Mountain. And that was pretty fun. It saved me a lot of trial and error. And that he's a really interesting guy. He's an icon of the sport. So it was kind of fun. At the time I had no idea, but reading about him and now I realize that it was a good opportunity for me to meet that guy and get that experience. So I moved out to Utah, but they weren't allowing patrollers to patrol on Telemark equipment at the time. And so I was trying to tele ski on my days off, and I was alpine skiing at work for a few years until they let us work on our Telemark equipment.
What was the? I've talked with a couple patrollers on the podcast, and I always ask I always heard back in the day it was the toboggan. That was the reasoning, like you shouldn't have free heels. Is that correct in your experience?
Well, yeah, I think there was a perception of, a lack of ability to control the toboggan, especially in difficult conditions. Running a toboggan is definitely the bread and butter of a ski patroller. And once you learn the skills, like anything else, you become efficient, and the toboggan actually will do most of the work for you. But still, you have to have the ability to manipulate your skis and control the speed of the toboggan. So there was a perception of, leather boots, hippies, and wool, fragile bindings, and there was a concern that we let this hippie punk in his like leather boots or whatever get in front of a toboggan, and if the binding fails or he falls down, that's a big liability for the resort. Now, that being said, I started telemark skiing I think the same year that the Scarpa plastic boot was released, and that was the first pair of boots that I actually owned. I had rented other gear or borrowed gear before, and that was like a 2-buckle boot with a Velcro power strap, pretty minimal compared to what we're skiing in today. But it was, a lot more durable boot, provided a lot more edge control. And that boot actually forced the binding companies to kind of improve their bindings. So there were a few of us on patrol that were like, we can do the job, we just need to prove it. And so we wrote a proposal and spent a couple of years kind of trying to convince management, and finally it came down to me sitting down and having a little heart-to-heart with the mountain operations manager at the time, Chuck English, at Deer Valley. And I said, let me put my gear on, come and ski with me, tell me what you want me to do, and I'll show you that I can do it. And so I ran a toboggan for him in moguls and showed him about how I can manage my gear on the scene when I get in and out of my gear. And he's like, all right. And then we were off and running.
Wow, that's legit, dude. That's and Chuck English was there a long time, right? Like that. He was
there. I'm not sure when he started, but he was patrol director, and then he moved into mountain operations director. He was there for a good long time.
Yeah. Wow. So you were really a catalyst of making Telemark available to the patrollers then.
Yeah, there was one guy, Scott Morrow, patrolled me for a couple of years. Then he moved on to Alta, and he was a really, really ripping tele skier. So he kind of started the ball, wrote the first proposal, and then he moved on to Alta. And I kind of carried that forward and kind of revised the proposal and kept trying to convince, my bosses that we could do it.
Wow, that's cool, man. That's interesting because I've definitely heard different policies and things over the years. And yeah, it's always interesting to kind of hear the history. I mean, since you've been there almost 30 years, I mean, that's like, that's pretty cool. And that makes sense too, because, you know, as you're saying, leather boots and torsional rigidity and tearing bindings out. I mean, I'm thinking like, okay, like that's fair. That's a fair assessment, you know, with that older gear. And mid 90s would have been, like you said, perfect timing for, you know, you got a plastic boot, wider skis.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah, that's cool. So I'm curious. So since you were on that gear like mid 90s, I mean, has much changed in terms of patrolling and on Telemark gear from then until now? Because, you know, that's something I've always known about you and patrolling is like you were always kind of forward thinking with the gear as far as I can tell. Like, you know, especially once I opened the shop, like you'd pop in and show me this and that. And I'd be like, whoa, like, dude, you're thinking about this way more than I ever did. I'm like, that's pretty impressive, especially when you started showing me Tecto stuff that you were fiddling with. And I mean, as far as looking at patrolling now as a telemarketer, just in general, versus where it started when you're doing this proposal, I mean, like what are some of the milestones or things that changed since you started?
Well, let's see. I think there's a more variety of boots available. I mean, there's 3 different manufacturers of boots. So that's helpful for people finding a boot that works for their style and their foot. Back then you had, you know, one plastic boot or like the Merrell Super Comp. And I think those boots, I never skied in the Super Comps, but it seemed like they would have similar performance when the Super Comp was brand new. But they, you know, as leather boots do, they break down and get pretty floppy over time. I think the durability and convenience of use is a lot better now with the Rotafella NTN bindings or the 22 Designs Outlaw. And of course, both those bindings have a ski brake. And so that makes things a lot easier managing your gear on the scene. One of the things about patrolling, sometimes depending what you're doing, if you're on like a work run, working on taking stuff out after a storm or, you know, messing around with signs, sometimes you're out of your bindings 3 or 4 times in a run. And so being able to get in and out of the binding and manage the gear is a big part of being a telemark skier. So back in the day, you know, you had to use leashes and that was a little more time consuming to get in and out. So you just had to really be on top of, you know, like a entry and exit ritual, getting in and out of your gear to make sure that the skis don't run away on you when you're taking care of your patient. And then you had to be a little more vigilant in like inspecting your gear, checking for loose screws or looking if there's some part of your binding is about to explode. And now, like, I've spent a lot of years on the Rotafella Freeride NTN binding, and that's kind of like an alpine binding. You can just sort of like jam your toe in, lock it down, and go. And then when you need to get out of the binding, you pop that lever up, and it's just like an alpine ski. So I think, you know, the durability and ease of use has definitely improved quite a bit. It makes it more accessible and makes the job a little easier. You know, there's one less thing you have to worry about.
Yeah, you keep hitting on gear management, I guess, because I've never been a patroller, but that makes a lot of sense because, you know, you think like when you're rolling with a leash, you know, it's like, you know, you'd have to get down, heel throw off, like undo the leash, like then you got to like either flip your skis over so you've kind of got your binding as a claw, you know, on the mountain, or you got to stick it vertically, you know, like there's all these other things where like brakes kind of take that over where you can just snap it off and go. That makes a lot of sense, especially when you're trying to attend to somebody. I'm sure, like in a bad situation, you don't want to be fiddling or losing your ski.
Yeah,
especially.
Exactly.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I hadn't thought about that. The free ride seemed like I mean, now that there's others, hindsight's 2020. I mean, when that came out, though, that seemed really good. And there's a lot of things I still like about some of the construction of that thing. I feel like you adopted NTM pretty early, didn't you?
Well,
not super early.
That early. I mean, obviously was very interested in it, saw it come out, but at that time my kit was pretty dialed in. I was on an axle in a Terminator boot, And so I kind of waited a little bit. And the thing that spurred me to get a set of NTN boots was finding out about the Tecto TTS binding for touring, and I'm like, wow, that looks like it could be a good direction to go in terms of a lighter weight binding that would still, function at a high level for touring. And then once I got those boots, I'm like, well, geez, I got the boot. I might as well check this other more resort-based binding out, like the free ride binding.
Oh, that makes sense. Yeah. Well, and that, yeah, no, that totally makes sense. I know, because even as I'm talking to you, there's sort of this dichotomy that I've always known about you, because you had the patrol kit and you're in resort, and then I always knew that you were a backcountry guy too. I mean, it wasn't like you were just only lift served at all,
Right.
I want to get into that. One question I didn't want to forget about is, you cross paths with Todd Stewart in the patrol zone over there at some point, right? At
the resort. Yeah. He was a patroller, but he had moved into the grooming department a few years before I got there. But we had mutual friends. I met him through another friend of mine who worked on lift operations, who was a teleskier. We kind of linked up because we were both, teleskiers. So it was kind of one big happy family back then with all the departments.
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. Because I had Todd on the podcast, and a lot of people really vibed with his story. Because anyone who's met that
he's a great guy.
Yeah, he's just a great person. And then that whole experience of him living in the mountains and then hiking to Deer Valley to work is pretty unique,
Go to work. Yep.
Oh, yes. That's wild, man. Okay. So it's at Deer Valley that you meet Noah Howell, right? Or Jonah?
Correct.
Noah and Jonah, or just Noah?
Well, I met Noah first, and then I met Jonah. He was working in lift operations a couple seasons, I guess, and then his brother Jonah came and started working in the ski school as an instructor.
Mm. And for those people out there that are like, who
are these guys?
Who are these guys? So Noah and Jonah were the gentleman that started Powderwhore Productions, and so
along with Andy Jacobson and Andy Rosenberg.
That's true. Yes, good shot. Yeah, good call. Yeah, it was the four of them. So, quick side note to that is those four guys. The first time Powderwhore kind of happened was actually in a Toughguy Productions movie.
Yes.
And it was like a set back then, Toughguy Productions, and I've had Nat Ross on the podcast a long time ago, but there was a time where if you had a good enough camera, we called them the 3-chip cameras. I don't know if you remember that, but there was...
vaguely.
It was funny. It was like if you had good enough footage, you could send it in. Anyways, those four guys had kind of said, hey, we're going to make this little segment. And so if you go back, I don't even know which movie that was, but Powderwhore was a segment, and then it becomes its own production company. And that's why I was curious. Were you the one that introduced Noah, or was it Todd telling me that somebody introduced Noah to telemark skiing? And I was like, wait, what? It was you? How did that happen?
So I think that probably would have been Kurt Souls, who was a lift operations supervisor, and probably Noah's immediate supervisor. And he started telemark skiing, and I met Noah through Kurt. I didn't know Noah originally, but Kurt's like, hey, let's go skiing. And, Noah was tagging along, trying to figure it out on his, used gear. He started off on pretty minimal, old school gear, like leather boots and 3-pin bindings, as I recall.
Yeah, I need I'm going to drag those guys out somehow.
Good luck.
Yeah, I know, right? They're going to be like, dude, come on. Really? It's 2022, man. We don't want to talk about this. But I feel like it is an important thing to document at some point if I can talk them into it. So, okay. So you guys end up meeting up, and then Jonah comes in the picture. And then at what point do you start kind of going out and filming with those guys?
Good question. It sort of happened gradually. Noah got a hold of the family's, VCR tape, home movie camera. Just because he's a really creative person. He has a very, very creative frame of mind, and he's always looking for like new things and different ways to express himself. And so he started bringing this big clunky, home movie camera, with a big like VHS tape that would like snap into the side,
like an old news camera or something.
Yeah, and started like just filming stuff because it was kind of intriguing to him, and it was just kind of fun. And we would sit around every week or so and look at our little ski adventures, and so that just kind of kept evolving. And I think he really got more serious about it when he met up with Rosenberg and Jacobson at one of the Telemark free ski competitions. He started going to those and met up with those guys. And I think, as I recall, at that time, Andy Rosenberg had a pretty decent camera, like one of those 3-chip cameras, that you would have to do like a production quality film. And they all clicked because they were all really good Telemark skiers and kind of became friends, and just started going out and touring together. And since I was already a touring partner with Noah, it was just sort of like if I had a day off and it was good snow, he'd call me up or I'd call him up, and we'd just make plans and start skiing.
Yeah, so I mean, it was super organic. It wasn't like, hey, we're going to start a movie company. I mean, it just...
Yeah, I think it was like that. They were all interested in trying to capture what was happening, at least from their perspective, as much as just having a lot of fun, trying to go find fun powder to ski and cool lines to ski around the Wasatch. Yeah,
no, that's, I know. And it's funny to think, I mean, that was a long time ago. This is probably early 2000s, right? Like 2003, 2002, somewhere
2002, in there. 2003. Yeah, sure. Yep.
Yeah. That's crazy. Yeah. I mean, and it really was, I think every time I talk to guys that I know, like you, it's like we date ourselves immediately by talking about this stuff. And then I sit here going, holy shit, that was a long time ago. Like we're talking about like VHS tapes and cameras and stuff. Oh man, that's funny. Well, so I mean, you guys are touring partners, and that's kind of where I meet you for the first time, because eventually this sort of evolves into what becomes PW05, which is this first movie that Powderwhore puts out. Yeah. And I mean, the way I recollect that too is, I mean, you were at the premiere, weren't you? The one at Broovies or whatever.
Yep, at Broovies, yeah.
I mean, I remember, tell me if I remember it correctly, because the way I always remember it, and this was probably a few beers deep too, so this is why I'm asking for corrections if I get it wrong. But it's like, I remember, the movie gets put together, and then a bunch of us show up, and some of us kind of know each other, but it was, there's Todd Stewart's there, you're there, I'm there, there's this Andy's and, Noah and Jonah, and from what I remember, they only booked like one premiere. Like it was like whatever, the 8:00 show. Yeah. But then it sold out. And, and then they were like, there's a lot of people here to see this. We should do a second showing. Isn't that how it went down?
I think that's correct. Yeah. I think we didn't expect as many people to be, wanting to come out and see like a Telemark specific movie, from these local boys. But yeah, it was surprising how popular it was, at least, within that small community.
Yeah. Well, and then it's kind of interesting to think that then turns into them doing a decade of movies.
Right. Right. Who knew?
Yeah, totally. And I mean, they really had their own niche within Telemark and backcountry culture, because it was really just about powder skiing. I mean, that's really, I mean, I guess PW05, I was like the park guy. I mean, but that didn't really last, or that wasn't the main focus by any means, like moving forward,
Right.
Here's a question. Being a backcountry guy with that crew, I mean, I just remember, because I remember hiking around with you guys and being like, this sucks. You guys are too fast.
Yes, they're all very fit. Rosenberg is a machine. He's like a big diesel pickup truck. And Jacobson is like a little gazelle. Noah is just big, long-legged guy with a big VO2 max. I had a hard time keeping up.
Really?
It was really pushed me too, yeah.
And
in a lot of ways.
That's probably why they ditched a lot of us later on, because they were just like, you guys suck. And I mean, it was like that though, because you go out. I mean, these were, and especially back then, I mean, and I wasn't doing the big objectives, I think, like some of you guys were, but I mean, you guys were going deep into the Wasatch, which was like not really that popular back then because the approaches were so nasty and long.
Right.
And they're hauling camera gear out there.
Yes. And heavy gear too. I mean, the stuff today is so light, but back then, like especially with a big telephoto lens and a tripod. Yeah. It's a lot of work.
Do you have any, like, I don't know, fond memories or funny, I don't know, anything that like strikes you from that era that was super interesting?
Let me think here. That's a good question. I don't know. It's all one big blur of like powder shots and stuff. You know, I will have to say in general, it was very inspiring to be up close and watch those guys ski. And it definitely inspired me to push myself in terms of skiing, you know, in terms of trying to ski fast and strong, you know, like those guys. Yeah, I'll have to think about that. Maybe I'll come back to that. I'll think a little bit about like what was a good standout.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing too, thinking about you guys back then, it's like, you know, I mean, nowadays, you know, everyone has a GoPro or, you know, like our iPhones shoot video better than the cameras you're talking about for sure.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, that's really what was kind of unique. It was almost like at the end of this like analog generation, and then and you're bringing these cameras out and capturing all this stuff. So you know, one of the things I think about from back then was, and even just talking to you, is it must have been an interesting learning experience from like an avalanche safety perspective, you know. Did you feel like just like, do you remember like everybody kind of just learning a lot of that stuff too as you guys were kind of going out more and more?
It was sort of a learn as you go. It wasn't, we weren't ever super, you know, detailed or organized. It was more like, let's keep up with the avalanche forecast, rely on that great resource we have in the Wasatch. What's the forecast say? And then, you know, Noah always had kind of a list in his back pocket, if you will, of objectives. And based on the forecast and the crew, you know, he would have like an A, B, C objective. And so if the thing he really wanted to do probably wasn't going to be safe because of the Abbey conditions, there was always like a plan B and a plan C. And that list, I mean, he literally had like a list of objectives on a whiteboard in his office, you know, as things progressed, of the kind of things he wanted to accomplish or shots that he was envisioning for the next movie. And so then it was more like really observational based for out and about. I know I always try to just kind of keep the conversation going, like, hey, do you see that wind affected snow up there? Or what's the snow conditions looking like right now? Just trying to keep that conversation open. And but the foundation, I think, was always the forecast center forecast, you know, as the kind of the foundation of our understanding of what was going on.
Yeah, and just you guys just being out there all the time, I think was probably, I mean, you're just constantly learning.
There's quite a lot to be said for that, kind of intuitive understanding of what's happening in the snowpack if you're out there every day. And of course, I was only able to ski on my days off, you know, 1 day a week, sometimes 2 days a week if the conditions were good and they'd invited me along. But being out there every day on all different aspects and elevations, you know, if you're paying attention, even halfway, you kind of do get a good intuitive understanding of what's happening. Is the snowpack settling out and bonding, or is it still pretty, grumpy and agitated and like fragile? So I think that's one of the things that's from Noah's experience. As I watched him progress is just his ability to understand what's going on based on being out there so much.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, he definitely has ended up more in like mountaineering and, kind of like really big objectives,
Oh yeah. Yep.
Which is cool. Yeah, that's fun. It's fun just to hear you talk about it. 'Cause it's like, there is a lot of cool memories of watching all that kind of play out and all the movies that came out and just, it's good stuff. Also, there was a lot of deep snow.
A lot of deep snow. And there were some close calls. I mean, that one avalanche that Rosenberg got caught in on Superior was very lucky. And Noah was caught in a couple avalanches. So I think there were definitely some close calls, but I feel like those guys checked themselves, and didn't just like brush that off, and use those as learning experiences to just avoid that in the future.
Yeah. Were you there for that Rosenberg one on Superior?
I was not. No.
That was
one of the days I was working.
That footage still is crazy to watch. I mean, that was a long ride. That's like top to bottom on that thing. Like, I mean, what is that? Like 1,700 vert or something? I mean, that's a lot of vertical.
If that, if not more.
Yeah. Geez. Oh man. Well, so I wanted to kind of touch base on, like we talked about patrolling and,
Sure.
Kind of where, before we hopped on the podcast, we were talking a little bit about kind of where you're at now. And if you're cool talking about it, I think this is an interesting thing. 'Cause you talked a little bit about some knee stuff and I think this is kind of, I'm glad you wanted to kind of talk about this because, I think there's kind of this social faux pas of like, I've been a telemark skier my whole life and,
right.
Maybe you have to do some alpine skiing at some point. And I guess first off, maybe explain a little bit about, like your knee situation and obviously you're a professional skier and you ski every day. So like what exactly is going on like with your knees and stuff?
Well, I'm just getting old, Josh. A lot of it, a lot of repetitive motion. So I have some chronic tendonitis in my patellar tendon in both knees, and then I actually have some arthritis on the patella of my right knee. And so what that means is like bending the knee past maybe about 90 degrees starts getting kind of uncomfortable and achy feeling. And you can alleviate some of that with vitamin I. And I have been through various minor knee injuries like sprains and stuff. I've never torn my ACL, and my meniscus is actually in pretty good shape. But for whatever reason, just through a full career of skiing, I have these kind of aging athlete issues where my knees are slowly kind of showing their age. Yeah, so definitely doing like a full deep knee, telemark turn elicits a lot of discomfort, especially the one right knee. And that's kind of been an ongoing, gradual problem, over time. And I would always be like, all right, well, I need to kind of like be more diligent in stretching and recovery, and I'll ice it. But maybe 2 winters ago, I was really kind of feeling like I was struggling quite a bit because it was just a lot more uncomfortable than normal. And, one of the things about the telemark turn is once you get the foundation down, if you just kind of get out and ski a lot, you develop a fluidity and a muscle memory. And especially if you're working and skiing a lot or just have a lifestyle where you can ski every day, you definitely get a bomb-proof turn. But in order to keep that bomb-proof turn, you have to keep making turns, telemark turns, And I was just making a lot of alpine-style turns because it kind of bugged my knee, and I was just struggling with that. And I'm like, all right, fuck it. I'm just going to get some alpine boots and, because I love the job, partly because of the skiing, partly because of the camaraderie of my fellow patrollers, and because of the work, helping people and, doing stuff out on the mountain. But it still comes down to ski patrol. And if you're not having fun skiing, what's the point of being a ski patroller? So I got a set of alpine boots, and remounted a couple sets of skis, and spent the rest of that winter on alpine gear. I also got some AT gear, and so I could tour on an alpine touring setup. And then the same thing, the beginning of this last winter season, I did actually get back on my tele gear, but I was more for the kind of the mobility issue. Early in the season, when we're opening up the resort, there's a lot of kind of traversing around and skiing in weird snow, but it's a lot of like in and out of your bindings, climbing on stuff, and traversing as you're putting up rope lines. And so that kick and glide mobility is really advantageous, and from a patroller's point of view. And but then after things kind of got up and running and we're open to the public, I just swapped back to my alpine gear. And so that's where I'm at.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. I mean, there's a lot of wear and tear. I mean, just regardless of, just skiing in general, I think over that long, a 30-year career, that's a lot of wear and tear on the body. Yeah. And that's what I was kind of hinting at. And thanks for explaining that, because I think there's probably a lot of people, in similar situations. Maybe, I don't know how many 28-year-long ski patrollers are listening to this. That's a pretty big accomplishment, but I've always felt that way with Telemark. It's kind of an interesting, there's almost like this, I don't know. It's like I don't know. It's because there's so much love that goes into the turn, maybe, that to say that you're not doing it as much anymore, almost hurts to tell anybody out loud. Do you feel like that? Is it almost weird? Because I've always, you and I know each other through Telemark, so it's
I think I felt like it was going to be weird, but it turned out to not be weird.
That's good.
Everybody on the patrol was like, oh, all right, whatever. Nobody's really said anything. Oh, you're going back to Alpine, Nobody said anything. In fact, a couple patrollers this last winter started Telemark skiing. They got some gear, and one of them turned out to be a pretty good ripping skier, and he tested out in his gear, and he's patrolling on tele gear. Oh,
that's cool.
So for every one old guy that retires out, maybe if I can get two new young whippersnappers hooked,
Oh, that's funny.
I'll do my part,
Well, I guess that's the cycle. That's the cycle of it, I guess, and it sounds like you're saying you could be technically on tele gear. It's just more the knee dropping stuff, is where it starts irritating the tendons and stuff.
Yeah. And the thing is for me, I came from an alpine background, pretty strong alpine background. And I started Telemark skiing, after I'd been skiing for 20 plus years already. So I always made a lot of alpine style turns anyways. When I was just trying to figure it out on my own before I took a lesson, I was try to make a fake mark turn, and then when I got a little tired, I just make alpine turns. But a good bomb-proof alpine turn, I think, is just one of those tools that should be in every Telemark skier's toolkit. And as a patroller, if you're running a toboggan down an icy, steep slope with a big corn-fed Texan in the back, you're not doing a drop knee turn. You're doing a parallel alpine-style side slip turn, for edge control and maintaining the control of that toboggan.
Can you actually make a Telemark turn in the toboggan?
You can. Your wheelbase gets a little longer, so the tail of the drop ski kind of sticks back, so you have to be conscious of that tail hooking up with the bow of the toboggan. So the toboggans have a brake chain that drapes underneath the bow, and you can pull that up if you don't want to, or you can drop it. And that gives you extra control over the speed. That's really what does most of the speed control. So if you are maneuvering your skis, switching sides or whatever, you have to be conscious of the tail of the ski getting close under the bow and maybe getting hooked up in the chain. If you're conscious of that and just riding right up in the front of the horns, you can make tele turns.
Huh. I guess I never even considered that. Wow.
Yeah. The thing is when the toboggan's weighted, You got to be really conscious of maintaining a speed that you can control. And when I'm coaching other skiers, I always advocate, an alpine style turn. And then when you're running a loaded toboggan, it's really not making turns. What you're doing is alternating between like a wedge, snowplow, or a side slip.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
and
full
you're kind of trying to run the fall line, or maybe, make a concerted effort to do a traverse in a certain spot. But it's better really to run the toboggan in the fall line as much as you can. Yeah,
that totally makes sense. Yeah. I mean, yeah, your concern is not to make turns while you got someone in there. I'm sure it's more like, how do I get this person safe to the bottom?
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. Wow. That's interesting. Well, it's so you still got a telly set up though.
Oh yeah, I've got.
You got plenty,
dude. I should send you a photograph of the ski rack in my garage. Between me and my roommate, we've got a whole ski shop of skis. So I have several sets of telly gear because I'm a snob and I like, buying skis all the time. So yeah, I have several telly sets still at my boots.
I love that. Well, it's
so we'll see what happens in the future, but so that's kind of where I'm at now.
No, that totally makes sense. I mean, from a work perspective, I mean, you got to do what's best for the work situation, and I like how you said too, like, I think every telemarketer, just while we're on that subject, it's like, I'm always preaching on here, like, telemark is the downhill technique, that but you also should know parallel technique. I mean, that's just as much part of being on freeheel gear as the telemark turn is, and
yeah, it's really strong. I mean, like if you're skiing something steep and narrow, you may not have room to make a telemark turn because your wheelbase is longer. Or if you're kind of billy goating around in the top of a shot, kind of traversing around some rocks, having a good bomb-proof kind of alpine stance and turn, can be helpful. Or skiing with a really heavy pack.
Yeah.
In junky snow, coming out of like a mountaineering objective and you got your heavy pack from your base camp and you're just over it. You just want to get home. So having a good solid alpine style turn can help.
Yeah.
One more way to make a turn.
Well, and you nailed it too. Like I often will advocate for the idea of somebody moving into alpine touring gear, like when they're serious mountaineers. And because, not to say that I wouldn't love to see a telemark skier do a legit descent on a really technical mountaineering line, but I think it's almost hard. I mean, it's, if you're on alpine gear, it's easy to define like a first descent for instance, but there's some of that really high level technical mountaineering stuff where like, yeah, you've got a pack, maybe you've got rope with you, like that kind of level of stuff, saying it's a first telemark descent that like, it's so like you said, you're still making an alpine tour, but you're on freeheel gear. Like there's a little, I think there's a lot of discrepancy there. And there are some legit first descents of stuff where I'm there's a legit telemark turn going on the majority of the time. And that's pretty cool. But, like I said, I almost advocate like kind of guys like Noah Howell, like people are probably like, oh, he doesn't tell you anymore or whatever. But some of the stuff that like Noah went on to do, it's like making a telemark turn in that kind of terrain, I think really makes it more risky and probably a pain in the ass, frankly. So
yeah, it just depends on what you think the best tool for the job is.
Right.
I mean, I talked to Noah quite a bit about this, and he was like, yeah, on some of these steeper things, as he was trying to finish off the shooting gallery lines here in the Wasatch and then moving on to other bigger objectives in other parts of the world, he's just like, I'm doing all alpine style jump turns. I'm not making telly turns anyway, so why not, get a lighter boot, lighter binding setup, something that's a little more secure, a little better edge grip, edge power, for those kind of environments.
Yeah, totally. That totally makes sense to me. Well, hey man, this has been amazing. I love catching up with you, and yeah, I mean, it's cool digging into the patrol side of things. I always think that, that's a real professional side of skiing that I often think gets overlooked, like someone says professional skier, right. we generally conjure up like some cliff jumping, heli skiing kind of guy.
Like Lindsey Vonn is a professional skier,
right?
But there's other aspects to it, right?
For sure, like the education portion, the ski patrol portion. I think that's really cool. And I was saying at the beginning, I hope some young kids sitting around going, wow, all right, I can live in the mountains and patrol and bike patrol, and there's ways to do that. And I think that's a really cool thing to share with people. So, and all the good Powderwhore history, man. That's even better. That's the icing on the cake for me. So, well, cool, man. Well, I hope the knee keeps rehabbing, and I'm sure I'll have to get up and make some telly turns with you at some point. I'll bring a bottle of ibuprofen and some beer, and we'll call it good. That's how it works, right?
All right, that's a plan. Let's make that happen.
Okay, man. Thanks for being on.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
You bet. See ya. So sweet having Daryl on, and just capturing what he's done. I think the biggest thing that stands out to me about him is that 28 consecutive seasons at Deer Valley being a ski patroller. And, one of the things that he said right at the beginning when he was talking about that is I was like, yeah, I hope there's some young kid listening to this and gets inspired. And I thought, I love that he brought up, like, it's an amazing, rewarding job. And also, there's a lifestyle that comes with that. You're probably not going to be making lots and lots of cashola. So, but it's an amazing life that you can live, and it's possible. So that's the part that sticks out to me most. And of course, all the other stuff we talked about, patrolling, backcountry skiing, the early Powderwhore stuff. I absolutely love catching up with those guys that I met early on in, over 20 years ago. I guess 20, yeah, just shy of 20. I guess PW05 was 2005. So, but lots of great history and cool to think of how it all came about. So really appreciate him taking the time to come on, and always love talking to ski patrollers, and really appreciate all that they do at our local mountains and keep us safe and take care of us, and really appreciate that. So before I check out for the end of this episode, be sure to check out the mailing list. You can get to it in the link in the show notes. Super important way for us to stay in touch. And that's the way to get all the information without having to do the scrolling and check out social media every day. But if you're on there, you can see what we're up to at Freehill Life on Instagram and Facebook, and check out what's going on there. You can reach us directly, as I said, customer service at freehilllife.com. That gets you to the crew at the shop. Great way to find out more about our protector skis. Batch number 1 is going into the final process. Batch number 2 is already getting made as well, and we're excited to get those out. So if you have questions, this is the time to get in on them. They're limited amount, and we want to make sure we've got all those pre-orders in before we get too late into the summer. Other than that, freehilllife.com to find all the goods, telemarkskier.com to find out all the other information, and you can email me directly at podcast@freehilllife.com. So happy to be a part of this community. I appreciate all of you out there that listen to this on a weekly basis or whenever you catch it. I appreciate that so much. And if you're on Apple Podcasts, leave a review. I love hearing what your thoughts are about the podcast, and that those reviews help us get out in front of more people in the snow community around the world. And that's what this is all about, is about spreading Telemark. So with that said, until next Monday, I'll be back again. Please help me spread Telemark always, my friends. See you later.